Will, a series produced, hosted and disseminated by Garland magazine. My name is Stephen Knott, speaking at 10 o'clock in the evening in South London. And I'm one of the editors of the Journal of Modern Craft, and I'm honoured, and speaking on behalf of my fellow editors, I know they are too, to announce this event as the first collaboration between Garland and the Journal. As with many other academic journals, the material that we have in the Journal of Modern Craft often only reaches a small community, limited by print run, and or whether you have access to a university library. So we were thrilled when Kevin approached us last year and joined an editorial meeting and suggested that we collaborate on 3 events per year to time in with our issues, the release of our issues. And we were thrilled to kind of take up the opportunity to kind of expand beyond our kind of normal Anglo-American sort of base. So today's event will be led by Caroline Kipp, Curator of Contemporary Art at George Washington Museum and the Textile Museum in Washington, DC, who last year ran a series of a series of interviews about mask making and mask wearing, primarily in the context of the US experience of COVID. We transcribed these at the journal and then edited them, and they appear in the first issue of our journal this year. So we've got a lot to pack in today and a global rostrum of speakers. So I'll pass straight on to Kevin, who will introduce the event further. So thank you, Garland, and thank you, Caroline, and thank you for everyone to join us this evening, this morning, wherever you are. Kevin.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So Kai, I'm speaking to you from Naarm, Melbourne, whose traditional owners are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and the ancestors of the lands where you come from. So today, now, with your permission, we will share our learnings over the course of the next hour. The Reinventing the Wheel series is an initiative of the Knowledge House of Craft, an association of thinkers and makers that aims to reflect the global diversity of the field. Each talk becomes a spoke in the wheel, our knowledge base. This is our first partnership event with the Journal of Modern Craft, and many of our steering committee members belong to the Asian region, who are soundly asleep at the moment, but I'm sure they will watch this with great interest. We started the series with Arti Kolra, who recounted the development of an Asian model for craft in the 20th century, which embraced tradition. Then Layla Al-Hamad looked at the Arab model, which gives smell a central place. For Kolakesa Wafa Mahini Tuai and Tulama Nave Barbara Makawati Afitu at Lagimama, the Moana perspective offered a customary framework for craft. Linda McIntosh revealed the role of royalty in Laotian craft, and from Senegal, Joseph Ndioni introduced the One Village, One Product movement, which reflects a broader focus on handmade production outside the West. Hae-Yung Cho spoke about the critical role of universities in the development of Korean craft, particularly ceramics. And last month, Ezra Shales offered a US perspective that considered the presence of craft in industrial settings. Now, inspired by the discourse of our Tongan colleagues, we call on the previous speaker to make a salutation before we begin. So Ezra, would you like to offer us a greeting?
Sure, I'm pretty terrible at prayers and stuff, but I'll give a token of thanks, and I just thought in doing so, I'd give a token of thanks to my student who, when I was reading their final paper, they found a dust protector in the Sears and Roebuck catalog from 1902, which seemed fitting to share, and in this kind of idealized connection between, I suppose, respiration and inspiration. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll just say thank you. It's look forward to the event, and lovely to be here.
Thanks for keeping the chain, Ezra. And there'll be some interesting resonances with your talk, I'm sure, today. So this discussion continues to consider the encounter of craft and industry, in particular the way handmade production stepped up to the challenge of masking up a nation. Glenn Adamson's recent history of craft in the USA concludes by remarking on the way a nation turned to craft during lockdown, to quote, as if by ancient instinct. What we see panning out today is a fateful encounter between the personal realm of the handmade and the increasingly abstract industrial regimes of sanitation. It resonates with the pressure on school craft education from occupational health and safety. We've got a lot to get through today, and we want to leave time for discussion, so please excuse the brevity of my introductions and, as usual, use the chat function liberally so we can open up issues. So we have a number of very interesting speakers. Of course, Caroline Kipp, whose series of talks inspired this issue of Journal of Modern Craft, is a curator of contemporary art at the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. Alison Matthews David is the graduate program director for Ryerson University's MA Fashion program and the author of Fashion Victims, The Dangers of Dress, Past and Present, and Killer Style, How Fashion Has Injured, Maimed and Murdered Through History. Kate Kretz is a visual artist trained as a painter. She holds a BFA from State University of New York at Binghamton and an MA from the University of Georgia. Megan Black is the director of the Canadian Crafts Federation and the North American president for the World Crafts Council. Ana Batista publishes one of the most prodigious craft platforms around, Irene Brunation, looking at the world through a textile and fashion lens. Professor Andrew Groves is the founder and director of the Westminster Menswear Archive, whose curator Danielle Sprecher will be joining us as well. And hopefully we'll get Farida Nazir from the University of Joburg, which heads up a jewelry department that oversees a dynamic new generation of researchers forging a nexus between customary adornment and contemporary life. So quite a selection of speakers and quite a lot to get through. So without further ado, I hand it over to Caroline to kick things off, and Caroline will also monitor the discussion afterwards. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Kevin. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this panel discussion, and it's a real pleasure to be with so many other folks who have been interested in and thinking deeply about masks over the past year. And I'm excited to hear everyone's presentations and then to moderate everyone's excellent questions afterwards. The original Art of Mask interview series occurred in July 2020, which has subsequently just been published in the Journal of Modern Craft and thus spurring tonight's program. Last year, I invited experts from the arts, fashion, sustainability, and medical fields to talk about the variety of issues and questions this moment of mask making and wearing have produced. During the series, I talked with Anna Rule, who's a medical researcher specializing in aerosol science, Kate Kretz, who's an artist and created the work Social Murder that you can see here, Yasmina Ram from the Slow Factory Foundation to talk about sustainability, Alison Matthews David, who's a fashion historian specializing in the intersection of dress and disease, and finally, Erin Robertson, who's a season 15 winner of Project Runway to talk about masks as an expression of contemporary fashion. We're very lucky that both Kate and Alison are able to join us here tonight to talk about their interviews, thus I won't be diving into their presentations as they'll cover them in depth. I asked Erin Robertson to join the Art of Mask series because her efforts represented a synthesis between what was then the emerging world of masks as fashion accessory, and simultaneously, she was one of the people making masks on a large scale for frontline and essential personnel, having produced over 2,000 just herself. Very early out of the gate, in addition to making masks, she was creating tutorial videos on YouTube for others to create their own masks. She partnered with Brothers Sewing Machine to donate 20 machines to people making masks for frontline workers. And she set up funding pages for both the mass production and the frontline workers themselves. Subsequently, she's been selling fashion-focused masks and collaborating with artists and using their imagery on masks. The funds from the sale of these are then channeled back to the artists as a way to offset the massive loss of income many have experienced with the closure of exhibitions, grants, and residencies. Through an intersectional lens, Yasmin Aram addressed the scope of sustainability issues, including humanitarian and ethical considerations that are often missing from the conversation surrounding sustainability in general and current questions of mask making and wearing. She focused on the halt in consumption and the revival of resourcefulness in the face of lack, skills which have not been widely essential since the Make Do and Mend campaigns associated with the world wars. Additionally, Aram was able to eloquently tackle the subtle but present pressure and quasi-shaming that was happening around the use of supposedly disposable masks by non-medical personnel. Hand in hand with this was the over-fetishization of the handmade mask, which was being positioned as an inherently morally superior object to ones which are considered disposable or produced through fast fashion. She proposed that through the intersection of social and environmental justice, that it is impossible to talk about true sustainability without addressing accessibility and financial ability to engage in certain practices. This includes the availability of time and education to research, to acquire, or to hand make a mask, denoting a level of privilege to engage in any or all of these activities that should not go unexamined. Ahead of the New York Times publishing articles about the airborne spread of COVID-19, Dr. Rule shared that she agreed with that working theory, and her presentation was really sobering. She stated that due to the airborne nature of the disease, that many of the questions about what type of fabric to use are nearly irrelevant, because at best they are only 50% effective. This is a pretty shocking statement for most of us, I think, and it was certainly an eye-opener to me at the time and for the audience attending the talk. During the audience question portion of the interview, people asked, should we even be bothering to wear or make fabric masks? And the answer is still yes, because some protection is better than none. However, I'll admit I found this initially depressing. Here's this glorious moment of textile scale revival and the primacy and value of textiles being front page news, and it seemed like the moment had sort of been dashed on the rocks, so to speak. That's when I realized it wasn't just about textiles or textile skills. It's not even about the mask's ability to primarily function as personal protective equipment. Graham Jones, associate professor of anthropology at MIT, stated that the mask is one of the most important human artifacts in all of anthropology. It is a tool of transformation that allows its wearers to transcend themselves, taking on timeless roles in ritual dramas. Repositories of power, masks are sacred objects crafted with ingenuity. And while Jones was referring primarily to sacred masks used in rituals and performances, today's masks are vessels for the transmission of complicated motivations and psychological needs. And so as we listen to the following presentations, I hope you'll view them as part of a wide and equal expression and spectrum. As a group, what do these masks tell us about ourselves? That the mask in the era of COVID is about protection. It's about expressing care and agency for our community's well-being, but it's also about self-expression, comfort, joy, and reclaiming power in an otherwise overwhelming situation. And with that, thank you, and I will turn it over to Allison now.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I will share my screen now and hope that all is well. Wait, here we go. I'll start the PowerPoint. All right, we're good? Okay, thanks, Carolyn. I'm really thrilled to be here tonight to be part of this panel and to talk masks. And I guess I came to this as a fashion historian. As you can tell from the titles of my books, I've mostly focused on how cloth and clothing has harmed its makers and wearers. But of course, the flip side of that is how it can also protect us in often very hostile environments, including space, underwater. And so this pandemic has made me rethink, I suppose, how cloth functions in this protective way and what the history of that is. And I also realized, historically, of course, epidemics were a reality of everyday life before, antibiotics and things like that, and now vaccines. And so in some ways, people in the past were dressed always with the idea that they might be going into an environment where disease was present. And so that made me rethink things as well. And so just some thoughts are, how did this function before germ theory? How does it function post germ theory when there's a different kind of understanding of disease transmission? And I'll just give you a very, very quick sort of run through. And obviously when disease was thought to be miasmatic, in other words, transmitted by bad smells, the way that you protected yourself was often through scent. So perfume, you wouldn't go out of the house, preferably if you were fashionable or had the means to, without gloves to protect your skin. You would not expose a lot of your skin. And the scent that you would add to gloves in particular, but also accessories in the Renaissance, for example, were thought to ward off disease. And then same thing, masks themselves were not there. I mean, there's the plague mask, of course, which I'll come to, but masks were also a feature of fashionable protection, but more in terms of, for example, this fashionable woman is wearing a mask to protect her skin from cold weather. They were more, they weren't seen as protection from disease. They also obviously provided a certain form of anonymity for women in public. So obviously when there was a different understanding of how disease was transmitted, here, the plague mask itself has perfume in the beak, as you probably know. So you were still you had scent, but you also had a physical barrier. But obviously when, these anti-plague masks that were developed by Dr. Wu Liande in the Manchurian plague in the early 20th century were a whole new idea of, as sanitized conditions were understood better, pasteurization, all of those things. But this was really the first medical mask that was meant to protect from airborne disease. So I thought that was really fascinating. And it just used what was available, like scrambling and making masks during the pandemic. He took gauze and bandages that were available to him to develop this mask. Obviously now we have different technologies and non-woven fibers and kind of more strategic masks, but also this idea of kind of how garment making could be also hygienic, because obviously there's a long history and trajectory of sweatshops and how disease might be transmitted in close working conditions, which is still a concern and is still ongoing. And when we think about garment production in the global South, obviously it's something we have to think about. But again, in the early 20th century, there were even labels that advertised themselves, like Prosanis. It's an American label that advertised that the fact that these garments were made under clean and healthful conditions, because people were also afraid of catching disease from sweatshop made garments. And then obviously now, we have our washing machines, we can clean our masks if we have cloth ones, but when we have our washing machines, but clearly outbreaks in production facilities, including Leicester last year, there's still a problem when people are working close together and in still unsanitary conditions. So that was something I was thinking about. And then to wrap up, my current project is on crime. So I've been thinking about masking and crime and criminalization and facial surveillance. This is a set of masks that were made from stockings. So again, just using what was available at the time to conceal identity and issues with that. And and how long that trajectory of criminalization has been, so that at the beginning of the pandemic, Aaron Thomas, a journalist, wrote that he didn't feel safe wearing a mask because of its associations with criminality. And it made me rethink about, now it's obviously much more common, but it made me think about the way that threat or protection, danger or protection are played out in the form of the mask. And that there is a privilege, or at least there was certainly a privilege to wearing masks, and fashionable masks. So that was where I was at, and I'm still thinking about masks. And yeah, so thank you. And I will pass it on now to Kate Kretz. So I will stop my share.
Thanks so much. Okay. So I would like to thank Caroline Kipp, the Journal for Modern Craft, and Garland Magazine for this wonderful opportunity to share my work. For the past 9 years, I've been involved in a monumental series I call #BullyCulture, calling out the aggressors, the intimidators, and the deceptively harmless systems that encourage and reinforce this behavior in our culture. Many called the series prescient, as it foreshadowed the election of 2016, when the United States chose the ultimate bully as our president. Soon after, I began the creation of a sub-series, the MAGA Hat Collection. I take counterfeit versions of the Make America Great Again hats worn by Trump supporters, and I rip them apart. And then I reconstruct them into traditional symbols of hate and oppression, which I view as corrective physical manifestations of the truth. MAGA hat wearers have always said that the hats were innocuous. I called out this gaslighting to reveal the essential nature of that administration and its followers by deconstructing their brand. The first MAGA piece was Hate Hat, a work that got me banned from Facebook and Instagram for 3 weeks. I wrote a piece about the censorship for Medium, and then others wrote about it. As a result, I finally got my page back and an invitation from Jen Tuff Gallery in San Francisco to show the pieces. We started to get threats against the work and against me, and so the show was changed to a secure weekend-long pop-up. I made Hate Hat because I felt strongly that a KKK hood made from MAGA hats had to exist in the world. When I created this, when I created this armband, I got a lot of kickback. I was chastised even by some artists. They claimed that the comparison was too much. I had gone too far. But I had thought long and hard about what Holocaust victims and survivors would want us to do if we saw history beginning to repeat itself. So I screamed as loud as I could to call out what I saw. It was not long before Trump supporters themselves started brandishing these symbols. For 4 years, as women's reproductive rights were under attack and children were being separated from their parents at our border, it felt as if half the country was caught in one of those nightmares where we frantically try to warn people about the danger, but no one hears our screams. Trump is only one man. Without his supporters, this failed businessman and reality TV star would have never been able to wreak havoc on the world. They are complicit. I made this mask when the pandemic hit, and I started to understand that once again, the most vulnerable people in our society were essentially being sacrificed. I needed to make this injustice concrete. This is the first MAGA piece where I started to cut up individual letters to make new text, trying to sew them down before the tiny letters frayed away. The definition of social murder is the class which at present holds social and political control, places citizens in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and an unnatural death. When the people you care about are in peril, you impulsively rush to save them. Although this man put his hand on the Bible and swore to protect the American people, Trump's instinctive response was not one of love for his citizens, but a move to protect his own power. Other countries shut down to preserve as many lives as possible. Ours prioritized the economy and regarded humans as collateral damage. The pandemic disproportionately affected the poor and people of color. The United States instantly split into those who could afford to work from home and others who had to choose between risking their families' lives or losing their paychecks. We think of killing as something that requires action, but the 585,000 Americans who died from this president's incompetence, deliberate denial, lies, and inaction are no less dead than if he'd lined them all up and shot them in the middle of Fifth Avenue. Thank you. And I'm going to pass you on now to Megan Black.
Damn, Kate, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that, but I'm going to try. That was amazing. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for welcoming me to this event today. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm honored and humbled to live and work in Fredericton, New Brunswick on the east coast of Canada in the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq, Micmac, and Passamaquoddy peoples. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which was first signed with the British Crown in 1726. Yes, Canada is a part of the British Commonwealth and has been a country for just over 150 years, but we only became an independent, self-governing country with our own constitution in 1982. That was the year that I was born. In the grand scheme of things, Canada is very new. However, the history of this place and the Indigenous people who have inhabited it since time immemorial are certainly not. So why do I bring up this complex history up in a discussion about masks and the current global pandemic? Because this history and the ongoing relationships between nations, settler and Indigenous nations, is intrinsically, undeniably, and in many ways painfully tied to the project I want to highlight today, which is simply called Breathe. Breathe is more of a community than it is a project. It has a life of its own and continues to grow as more and more people join and contribute to the project. Based mostly on social media, it's the brainchild of two incredible artists and curators, Métis artist Natalie Burton and Lisa Shepherd. Their aim and the impetus of this project was to encourage the Indigenous community to turn to beading as a healing, symbolic reaction to the pandemic. While beading remains the primary medium, works in paper, metal, wood, textiles, mixed media, and even glass emerged. The Breathe Project created a space for people to breathe openly, together, through their work, however they came to it, experts, amateurs, and experimental artists alike. These two curators, turned to technology to connect at a time when we were all learning how to disconnect, launching a Facebook group for artists to share their creations. Through the symbol of a mask, the community addressed their individual histories and our modern collective experience all at once, in many ways celebrating those who lived through such experiences in the past and who, despite all odds, persevered. This, I believe, was a much needed beacon of hope when the world was in a very dark place. And we've been there before. It was not so long ago that the Indigenous populations of Canada were ravaged by disease brought here by European settlers. Smallpox, influenza, even tuberculosis well into the 1950s. These communities have dealt with pandemics before, and now that the entire globe was faced with a similar crisis, their historic reality became our shared reality. From this wave, the Breathe Project was born. The idea that a mask, something that protects but also silences, could be flipped on its head to become a symbol of perseverance and even celebration, I thought was pretty genius. The mask is a symbol greatly debated, reflective of your own interpretation of the pandemic at large. It can be seen as restrictive and oppressive, or as a symbol of love and compassion. There are so many layers to this cake. It can be rich and delicious, but if you take it all in, it might make you sick to your stomach. This project walks this incredible line of comfort and well-being, of honoring culture, ancestry, and craft, while addressing really uncomfortable truths, all through a symbol that everyone worldwide can relate to. On the surface, it is that beautiful cake, but the recipe includes equal parts of honor and injustice. I must confess that I wasn't sure if I should even agree to present on this project, as I've played such a small part in the development of its existence. I was one of many jurors who were invited by Natalie and Lisa to sit on the selections committee for a first wave exhibition, which is traveling to Alberta, Ontario, and Saskatchewan. But really, I'm just a fan. I'm a craft fan, a huge craft fan with a huge craft crush on the curators, the work, the concepts, and the artists who came together to make this community of makers as beautiful and as meaningful as it is. I'm not a historian or an Indigenous person myself, but I'm the director of the Canadian Crafts Federation, and this project has been one of the most incredibly moving programs that I've seen throughout this country over the past 2 years. I can't say enough about the community that Natalie and Lisa have built. There are literally thousands of people following the Breathe project online, and artists continue to share new work through a second and third wave, as the intentions of the project still ring true. I want to thank the curators for their consent regarding the Garland article and this presentation today, but even more so for their time, the thought, the effort, and encouragement that they continue to put into the Breathe project. And I want to end here with a quote from a key figure in Canadian history, Métis politician Louis Riel. In 1885, he said, "My people will sleep for 100 years, but when they awake, it will be the artists who give them their spirit back." Just over 100 years later, he continues to be proven right again and again, as Indigenous artists tell their stories and lead new generations forward in the appreciation, respect, and beauty of Indigenous culture. In the case of this specific project, one bead, one mask, and one breath at a time. I'm pleased to end my presentation there and pass the baton on to Ana Batista.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the wonderful presentation so far. Give me a second, because I want to share my 1 minute. 1 second, because it's not moving. Okay. Can you all see it? Yeah. Can you see it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so this is more about my year in masks and a year in a mask and my perceived identity or what I was and what I am now. Okay, I mainly write about fashion, social issues, you know, like art, textiles, a variety of things. Let me tell you when I come from, you know, I love a mask. You know, my favorite costume is probably the Venetian bauta with the larva, which is like, means a ghost. It's a white mask. The bauta could go around Venice even when it wasn't carnival. So that was like a way to hide yourself, essentially. And you could do that all year round. I love masks because they allow you to conceal yourself, your identity, they protect your anonymity, like Margiela does, and he always did. And I love an artist who can do textile crazy things, like Aldo Lanzini in Milan, who comes up with this crazy, colorful mask to hide his identity and transform himself into something else. I have another artist here, Japanese wig designer Tomohiro Kono, and this book came out actually while coronavirus was spreading in New York, and he had to do this presentation, but we couldn't do any presentations because of the lockdown. And Tomohiro Kono sees the wig as a mask for the head, so I came up with this word for him. The mask fakes the mask for the hair. Fakes means hair in Greek. And again, you know, more full face masks. I love also other textile artists. We can come up with this wonderful concepts of the mask is something for your flesh that, you know, like they transform your bodies, or can radically change it through textiles or through filters, as you can see in the picture on the left, on the right bottom, or Anastasia Swift, who does mask to question identity and the Black identity and talk about slavery for presentations here. But something happened in me, you know, like in what I was doing. I usually do things about all these wonderful things, art and design, fashion, and then coronavirus hit Italy. The most famous mask became the surgical mask, the no-woven mask. We all became accustomed with the N95 mask by 3M. It was like you can use that, use the ordinary surgical mask, but we couldn't find any. Between February and March in Italy, it was a mess because most masks are made in China, and China was having its own problems. There was a shortage. Some people came up with inventive ideas. This man was spotted in a diving mask in Naples, for example, in February. Now, keep him in mind, because we're going to see something else. Masks became really, really rare, so that some chemists started selling them at incredible prices. In Pescara, my own town, the tax police found chemists selling them at 150 euros. It was an impossible situation. I came up with ideas. I made some textile masks. I had them printed. I made this with an illustrator in Scotland, Frank Boyle, kind of cute Frida cat mask. And then, oh, you can see this. I don't know why, but it broke. And it's a handmade steel inspired mask. There is basically that drawing you can see at the bottom of the page. And at the same time, there were other designers who were spreading ideas about how to make masks. Copernicus, the Copernicus French designers gave out a PDF to encourage people to do masks. In Italy, most factories closed down, but some factories stayed open to produce masks and to help people. In particular, we have the Miroglio group in Alba, Italy, started making masks, and also Prada in Tuscany. They made PPE, personal protective equipment, and masks for medical staff. Here we have an idea from Miglianico, the Abruzzo region, where I come from. Again, it was March 2020. A group of seamstresses came together and they started doing masks for the local population and the civil protection. So something small that went big. In New York, you had Christine Siriano, 3S4. In the case of 3S4, just two examples of the many fashion designers who started making masks to help with the effort. And 3S4 also did sustainable masks with leftovers from a previous collection. 3D printing also helped with, some companies did, like the NanoHack by Copper 3D, did 3D printed masks. And this was an idea for another mask. This was more not to go around or to protect yourself, but for oxygen. An Italian startup came up with a valve, the yellow piece that you can see applied to a diving, scuba diving mask. So that guy wasn't so bad. So that his idea in Naples wasn't so crazy after all. And they attached this device to the oxygen and in hospitals to help people breathing. Shima Seiki, that's a Japanese textile company. They came up with the whole garment technique. They do all this technique with their machines, and they came up with this masks, very technological, but also very light and simple. Again, this was last year. I produced a mask box that I gave to people who sometimes support my site as a present or to friends. Again, this was the same Frida logo you saw early on that I developed with Frank Paul. And this is the back. Please wear a mask. At the same time, around May, I realized that something was moving creatively. Fashion designers were coming back. Paulina Strada did the quarantine collection, and she came up with this collaboration again with Tomi Iacono. This wonderful mask, colorful. Obviously, they're not for real protection. You can put underneath a 3-layer mask and still go around in a crazy kind of funkish way. And this was done also for a charity project. So it was something good and fun. Artists also were coming up with interesting situations, ideas. Freya Sewell came up with a tribute to key workers, so National Health Services, IT people, media journalists, workers in the means of transport. And then I realized that there was another interesting point, the mask as the slogan, the mask as a powerful way to tell something to other people, still speak. For example, after George Floyd's death, and there were protests, and we often saw the Black Lives Matter, the masks with Black Lives Matter slogans. I can't breathe. This was not only scribbled down, but also obviously printed on masks. And justice, Black Lives Matter again, or Women's March Rally with notorious RBG with Peter Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice. Again, while voting, encouraging to vote, the mask became a good way to express, this encouragement. And obviously, when we got to Inauguration Day, the mask was one of the items of the day, especially coordinated in the case of Joe Biden with a dress, something that she's been doing Inauguration Day and also for Joe Biden's first speech. And the flowers on the mask and the dress were, references to the federal flowers, the symbols in the States. So coordination, fashion came back again in the world of masks, reclaiming again the mask back. Again, we're taking just a few days ago, you can see like a student on the left in a Yohji Yamamoto mask, and an influencer, Japanese icon on the right, Corinne Chan, and she's wearing this kind of rabbit mask, kind of crazy and colorful. So we are reclaiming again the mask. 1 year on, what happened to me? I just got a little bit of scratches on my face with the skin, nothing serious. It's a small price after all, after wearing a mask for a year on, being compulsory in Italy, wearing a mask. I wore it even in summer when it wasn't really so necessary, maybe outside, but I kept it on. And I remember that men who didn't think that they were, men who thought they were so macho, they didn't have to wear masks, attacked me. I was verbally attacked in the street for wearing a mask. This is like kind of bizarre. But anyway, I think that these small blemishes on my skin are just like a small thing. Almost, if I think back, well, it's just a small price to pay for what other people are going through. And I feel that I cannot change myself inside, because all these things that happen, and all the dead people all over the world, all the victims, deeply touched me, and the situation in Italy as well. So just a little bit on me has maybe changed and has gone, but I hope that I've become a better person, through this pandemic. Okay, thank you. And I hand it over to Andrew and Danielle. Go on, sorry, I interrupted.
Thank you. So hopefully you can see that. So both myself and Danielle at the Westminster Menswear Archive, we've been collecting masks since April last year, and we just opened an exhibition where we have been looking at the last year and the development of masks, in particular looking at menswear and designer masks rather than masks that are made by individuals or at home. So a designer's response. And we've got a few of these examples here. So this mask is by a Manchester company called Wawa. Oh, sorry, I don't know what's happening there. It's by a company called Wawa that designed this mask and released this mask on the 23rd of March, which was the date of the first lockdown in the UK, and was available to buy on Instagram. So for us, it's really an example of this instantaneous response that brands can do or companies can do using social media. So they've cut out the middle market of selling and buyers and shops, and they can respond instantaneously. And so this is the very first one in the exhibition. Whereas, Danielle, do you want to talk about the Huntsman mask?
Yeah, we were very keen to look at sort of traditional British menswear responses as part of this project, and Savile Row tailoring is kind of the quintessential epitome of that. So we were looking out for Savile Row versions of masks, and they started to appear in the summer. And one of the other key things about Savile Row as a place is that manufacturing happens on location in central London, in Mayfair. To be considered part of the Savile Row Bespoke Association, you have to still be making on the premises within this very restricted area of London. So these companies were able to respond because they had manufacturing on their sites. And they also responded in a very kind of gendered way in terms of utilising the language of menswear design. So a lot of them used shirting fabrics, and these were ones that they would have had available in their stores. So the Huntsman one is actually quite basic in terms of its make. It's a beautiful, very fine cotton. It has an embroidery H in the corner, but actually the elastic is just the kind of elastic that you would expect to find from a domestic or kind of haberdashery store. It's clearly something that they have had in their workrooms that they've used to make these masks. But we were quite shocked at the time how much they were charging for them, although subsequent masks that we've purchased were far more expensive.
And then the next mask I want to show you, just show you that one, is one of the other things we wanted to do as we were collecting. We were expecting masks from various designers. So in anticipation, we were expecting to see a mask from Vivienne Westwood, and we weren't able to find one. But what we did find, and we bought this via eBay, is the True Punk mask, Climate Revolution, which was produced by Vivienne Westwood in response to a number of protests that she took part in July and throughout the year, both to do with climate revolution, but also to do with Julian Assange case in the High Court. And for us, I suppose this is quite interesting. It's by a company called Bag of Ethics, and it's been produced in India. And a number of the masks that are in the collection, this and the ones from the British Fashion Council, which commissioned designers to design masks, were actually made in India. So by July, we were seeing, rather than the mask being made locally by local people or by brands or companies in Savile Row, we were seeing that trade opening up and people commissioning other people to make masks. And we were seeing protest masks. And we were seeing this actually from March onwards. I think one of our earliest masks is an anti-mask mask, which we were quite surprised how early those masks were actually being made. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, this is, so Vivienne Westwood went through quite, we were expecting them to be commercially available, and in her sort of distinctive colorways, so tartans, things like that. I actually purchased this from a shop, Vivienne Westwood store in central London, and I spoke to the retail assistants there, and they said the company had actually gone through quite a lot of angst about whether to even make masks themselves as a fashion company, and they sort of decided to go with Westwood's climate crisis protest ethos. And they did also support a charity led by, where they donated excess fabrics, and then they were made up into masks separately. And the price point for these ones was actually quite reasonable as well compared to some of the other design masks.
And then the next example we've got for you is a Burberry check mask. And Burberry had announced prior to this, in August 2020, that they were producing a Burberry mask. And so we got quite excited about the prospect of a Burberry mask. But actually, it took 10 weeks from the announcement of the Burberry mask to the mask actually going on sale. In the meantime, we came across this mask, which was from someone selling on Instagram under the name In-House Check. And what they were doing were taking old Burberry garments, in this case Burberry bedding, and repurposing that and turning it into masks. And knowing how litigious companies are, such as Burberry, I think this is a very clever way actually of getting around the idea of producing goods that are, not actually counterfeit, but actually repurposing already existing garments. And then the actual Burberry.
Really sophisticated in terms of its cutting and make, and almost sculptural in the way, and it came with a whole bump of information, antiviral coating, all sorts of things, but it retailed for £90. So the designer market for these sort of luxury goods, high-end accessories by autumn was definitely there.
And then the next example we've got is from Johnson's of Elgin, which is a Scottish mill. And this was probably one of the first examples we had where masks were becoming seasonal. So, you know, the earliest masks that we've got are a response to COVID-19 and were produced for free by Italian companies or British companies. Then they become something that's being sold, but the profits are going for charity. But by this stage, which is, you know, autumn, winter seasons, they've become a seasonal object that's part of a marketing campaign and being merchandised and being sold within shops such as Selfridges. So they've almost lost their meaning as a health product and becoming a really fully fledged fashion product by this stage.
And this mask is by a young British designer called Priya Ahluwalia, and this mask is part of one of the British Fashion Council initiatives, which they launched in the summer, with the proceeds all going to charity. And the first iteration of it was all British designers, and then they collaborated with the American Fashion Association and brought in some American designers. Priya's work is very much draws on her mixed heritage, Indian and Nigerian, and she uses tartan and also reuses fabrics a lot in her work.
And then the next mask, this is the most expensive mask we've got in the collection. It's from Louis Vuitton. And I suppose what's interesting here, it's got the appearance of being a jacquard weave, but it's actually not, it's printed. And this mask came with a matching bandana and little pouch that the bandana and the mask went in. And this cost £350 at retail. And it's made from cotton. And the instructions say that it's colour fast up to 4 washes. So if any of you have been following what you're meant to be doing with masks and how often you're meant to be wearing and washing them, you know, if we followed the instructions of this mask, it would only be colour fast for less than a week. So, you know, I think it's really interesting by this stage of the year, they've become some masks have become really status masks and about luxury and about an object that we all had to wear. How do people differentiate themselves from everyone else? And one of the ways obviously is through branding and status.
And this is our final one. This is Rick Owens and Champion, American sportswear brand. And Rick Owens actually started using masks in his collection several years before, very sort of fine chiffon in his menswear collections as well as women's wear. And he did that again in his last 2 seasons. Over 2020, and then this is a collaboration which happens a lot in menswear with big sportswear brands and then independent designers, and it's actually again really beautifully made, but has this long kind of face covering that goes right down over the chest. So interesting design element.
Then our final mask. This is actually pre-pandemic, so this is from June 2018, and this is from a Cold Wall designer, Samuel Ross's brand. And for us, I suppose this is interesting because there was a trend from 2017 onwards within menswear of masks being a fashionable accessory. And in some respects, it keeps on making me think of the yellow vests, which were only yellow vests until they started being worn as protests in Paris and France, and now can never go back to being just yellow vests. So this idea of taking a dust mask, which is a ready-made, but being overprinted by a Cold Wall with his branding and transforming it into a fashion object, I suppose for us it's interesting to think about what happens when we stop wearing masks and what will their meanings be and how will those meanings have been permanently changed, and will we ever go back to a time when masks can be just a fashion accessory. So that's a short overview of our masks from our collection. So I think now, are we handing over to Farida or Kevin?
Frida hasn't been able to join us, so we can go over to Caroline and discussion.
Thank you all for those great presentations. So yeah, we do have a couple minutes. So far, there is one question, which is about the display of masks, whether at galleries or museums. And so because everyone's actually coming from such a different geographical area, I am actually curious to hear the answer to this question. I'll speak from what I know, and then I would love to hear other people's response to that. As far as I know that the Renwick Gallery has put several masks on display that they've acquired for their collection. Additionally, there's a gallery in Cambridge called Mobilia, which specializes in craft, and they have been doing multiple rounds of masks of artist-made mask shows that have been really wonderful and diverse in media and wearability, of course. So is there anyone that would like to chime in about that?
Yeah, I suppose the thing I'd add into, because our exhibition opened last Tuesday, I think, one of the things we were worried about, and it's been proven to be true, is we were worried about social media. So we plan to publicize our exhibition on social media, but we're currently being shadow banned by Instagram and unable to advertise and promote on Facebook as well. And even though we're removing any mention of COVID-19 and making them any text, the most banal text you can imagine, we're still being shadow banned. So I think that talks to how people are feeling about masks and the idea of the power, I guess, they have, and who controls that power within the narratives that are, we've all discussed today. And I wonder whether, although we've done this exhibition now, actually the time we need to be doing the exhibition is actually 10 years from now, when we can truly understand this moment in context. And at the moment, I think for lots of people in lots of ways, it's something that they don't actually want to look at.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Yeah, I would actually agree with that. Everyone's just about sick of me talking about masks outside of this group, I have to say. So is there anyone else who would like to chime in?
Up in our fashion research collection at Ryerson is collecting them as well. And again, that with a local flavor. So I think there'll be would be really interesting, as you say, maybe 10 years from now to do a retrospective and look at that global, like what's been happening on a global scale. But it's really, as a historian, I'm thrilled that people are archiving them, even if they don't necessarily want to go see them in an exhibition yet. So yeah, thanks.
The International Museums Committee, the International Organization for Museums, is actually the costume committee. We're doing a online global response in terms of pandemic collecting on face masks, and there's going to be an online exhibition in November and an event as well related to that. So yeah, there's that will be online, but I think a lot of the institutions involved will also probably do displays.
Wonderful. Should we find it on the ICOM site? Is that the best place to find it? Or?
Yes, we've just had our first initial meetings. So yeah, actually it's a Canadian museum, ROM, and
oh, yeah.
they're coordinating. Yeah.
Perfect,
so.
Thank you.
And I think I saw Megan raise her hand as well.
Sure, yes, the Breathe exhibition is traveling to a couple of different provinces and having a traveling show of masks that have been worn maybe once by people. Hasn't been so much of an issue, but a lot of the pieces, a lot of the more intricate pieces from the exhibition have been purchased for collections as well. So I think that there's going to be a lot more of that. And like you said, for the Mobilia Gallery, I've seen a lot of other galleries in Canada showcasing sort of that local, what have artists from their community been making, and having that community oriented component to it, because it's an interesting way for people to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, many of us are in sort of a privileged position where we've been exposed to many of the much more elaborate or finely made pieces. And so for the general public to see those works too, I think it adds this whole different dimension to it. A similar question is, are there any plans to publish to the broader market? So I think this is maybe a question for Kevin and Stephen.
Well, certainly,
about masks, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly that will be continuing theme. within Garland. One of the interesting questions is where you fit masks into the categorization of craft, which is normally the pentad of ceramics, metal, clay, wood, textile, and so on. But to a degree, it's part of jewelry in the sense it's adornment. But on the other hand, it's also textile and fashion. But maybe it's kind of carving out a particular new kind of medium, because it seems, given the variants, that mask wearing will be here for the rest of our lives in a different way. And so to continue doing that, for instance, we've got in this current issue coming up a wonderful series of bark cloths from Tonga of masks in traditional Kapesi style. So it can also be, as we've seen with embroidery, and Farida Nazir in South Africa was going to talk about beading in South African masks, that it also provides additional opportunities for other crafts to come through as well through through masks, and Megan's work that she talked about is an obvious example of that. So I don't know whether you would say watch this space, because it's a bit about covering over somebody's mouth, but I think it's a sign of something that's still emerging, and it's good to keep tabs on it and to keep thinking about it.
Thanks for that, Kevin. Well, it's 6:02. Kevin, would you like to?
Well, just as a formal wrap up, because I know some people like to leave on the hour, but we can continue to discuss things after this for a while. But I just wanted to thank you, Caroline, for bringing this together so well, and for Stephen and the other members of the Journal of Modern Craft for providing the platform. The Journal of Modern Craft being, a peer-reviewed academic journal that offers this kind of hard currency of knowledge and research that's so important in our field. But I think what's come through is a sense in which during a time of great social distancing, where our normal rituals for connecting with each other through hugs and kisses and handshakes and so on were suddenly deprived, that the mask became an opportunity to express a sense of solidarity. And we've seen that through a lot of different ways, both in terms of identity and causes and so on. And it seems like there's a bit of tension there, both with the whole issue of sanitation and the degree to which the handmade can get past the door of a hospital or these sorts of things. So in a sense, there's a kind of resistance at play there, but also in terms of fashion. We've seen a lot of designers, particularly brands, start to get into this field, and the question of whether it becomes then a sign of elite status as to which kind of mask you're wearing, and whether this changes the nature of the solidarity of the mask will be an interesting issue to look at. But it certainly does show the degree to which the handmade is still a point of resistance in terms of the various other antisocial forces, whether for nefarious reasons or for utilitarian reasons, but that keep us apart, can continue to be important. So the next series, which obviously you're most welcome to, the next event is by Tricia Flanagan. She's talking about, and this relates to China and the idea of preserving crafts by doing digital recordings of people's hand movements. So it's looking at some new technologies for thinking about knowledge and material and making and so on. We'll also be announcing the formation of this association so that there's ways of sustaining a kind of global conversation like we've had about craft, because obviously it's so rich to have so many different people speaking together. So finally, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks particularly Caroline, Alison, Kate, Anna, Megan, Andrew, Danielle, Stephen, and Ezra for your salutation. And go well. And if you want to stay around for more discussion, please hang on. Thank you.